The blood drained from Rebecca Mitchell's face as she stared at the photo on her phone. What she'd initially dismissed as a harmless vacation snapshot of her son at his grandmother's lake house now revealed something that made her heart stop. In the background, partially obscured by shadows but unmistakable, was the face of a man who should have been locked away for the next decade, a man who had once promised to destroy everything she loved. How had Marcus found them? And why, after 7 years of silence, was he suddenly there, watching her 8-year-old son from the shadows? The questions swirled through Rebecca's mind like a violent storm, each one more terrifying than the last. Before you continue reading this heart-wrenching story of a mother's desperate fight to protect her child, make sure to subscribe to the Lost and the Found channel. This tale of deception, redemption, and shocking revelations will take you on an emotional journey you won't soon forget. Listen to the whole story to understand how quickly a seemingly perfect life can shatter when the past refuses to stay buried. Rebecca's hands trembled as she zoomed in on the photo again, praying she was mistaken. The lake house was supposed to be their safe haven, a place where her son Oliver could experience a normal childhood away from the shadows of her past. Her in-laws, Martha and Richard Blackwood, had taken Oliver for their annual summer trip, a cherished tradition that had begun when Oliver was just 4. This was the first photo they'd sent since arriving yesterday. "Everything okay, babe?" David asked, entering their home office with a mug of coffee in his hand. Rebecca quickly locked her phone screen, forcing a smile. "Just checking Oliver's photos, looks like they're having fun." David's warm smile made her stomach knot with guilt. After 7 years of marriage, he still looked at her with complete trust and adoration. He had no idea about Marcus, about her past, about any of it. As far as David knew, his wife was Rebecca Mitchell, a graphic designer who'd lost her parents young and had no serious relationships before him. The truth was far more complicated and dangerous. "Mom texted me too," David said, placing the mug on her desk. "Said Oliver caught his first fish this morning. Apparently he wanted to keep it as a pet." He chuckled, running a hand through his dark hair, flecked with early traces of gray at the temples. At 38, David was 6 years older than Rebecca, a successful architect with his own small firm, and the most genuinely good person she had ever known. She took a sip of coffee, using the mug to hide her trembling lips. "That sounds like our boy. Did they let him?" "God, no. Dad cleaned it for dinner." Oliver apparently got over his attachment pretty quickly when he tasted it. David leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "I've got that client meeting downtown. Should be home by 7. Want to do takeout tonight?" Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice for more than a simple, "Sounds perfect." As David gathered his things and left, Rebecca unlocked her phone again, staring at the photo that had upended her carefully constructed world. In it, Oliver stood proudly on the small wooden dock that extended into Lake Shawnee, holding up a plastic bucket filled with what looked like minnows. His sandy blonde hair was windblown, his toothy grin revealing the recent gap where he'd lost a front tooth. Martha had captured the moment beautifully, with sunlight dancing on the water behind him. But it was the background that had Rebecca's heart racing, a figure partially visible through the trees that lined the shore about 50 yards behind Oliver. Most people would have missed it entirely, but Rebecca recognized those eyes immediately. The same eyes that had once looked at her with such vicious hatred as his hands closed around her throat. Marcus Harlow, her ex-boyfriend, a man who should have been serving a 15-year sentence for nearly killing her when she was 7 months pregnant with Oliver. Rebecca's mind raced through the possibilities. Was it really him? Could he have been released early? Why hadn't she been notified? She grabbed her laptop and searched for information about Marcus, something she'd forced herself not to do for years. After several minutes of searching, she found what she was looking for. A news article from 3 months ago. Marcus Harlow had been released on parole after serving 7 years of his 15-year sentence. Good behavior, participation in rehabilitation programs, exemplary prison record. Rebecca's stomach lurched. She rushed to the bathroom just in time to empty its contents into the toilet. As she rinsed her mouth afterward, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, her pale face, hazel eyes wide with fear, light brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. For a moment she looked exactly like the terrified 24-year-old she'd been when she fled her hometown of Oak Ridge, changing her name and creating a new identity 3 states away. She had to warn Martha and Richard. She had to get Oliver away from the lake. But how could she explain it without revealing everything? The Blackwoods knew nothing about Marcus, about her real name, Emma Lawson, or about the fact that David wasn't Oliver's biological father. Rebecca tried calling Martha's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Reception at the lake house was notoriously spotty. She tried Richard's phone with the same result, then the lake house landline. No answer. Panic rising in her chest, Rebecca did the only thing she could think of. She packed a bag, scribbled a note for David claiming a design emergency with a client in Cedar Rapids, and got in her car. Lake Shawnee was a 3-hour drive away. She could be there by early afternoon. As she pulled out of the driveway of their suburban home, Rebecca glanced at the framed family photo on the dashboard. David, Oliver and herself on the beach last summer, all sun-kissed and smiling. A perfect family portrait. A beautiful lie. The truth was about to come crashing down around them all, and there wasn't a thing she could do to stop it. Chapter 2. Buried Secrets. The highway stretched before Rebecca like a ribbon of uncertainty, each mile bringing her closer to a confrontation she'd spent years avoiding. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white, and the pounding in her chest hadn't subsided since she'd seen Marcus's face in that photograph. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder, forcing her to slow down. The rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers matched her racing heartbeat as memories she'd long suppressed flooded back. Memories of Marcus, of who she used to be, of the night that had changed everything. Emma Lawson had grown up in Oak Ridge, a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. She'd been the valedictorian of her high school class, a scholarship student with dreams of becoming an architect. Then she met Marcus Harlow during her sophomore year of college. Marcus had been charismatic, confident, ambitious, everything the shy, studious Emma wasn't. He'd swept her off her feet with grand gestures and promises of a future together. By the time she realized who he really was, she was already too deeply entangled in his web of control and manipulation. It started with small things, checking her phone, questioning her whereabouts, isolating her from friends. Then came the criticisms, the put-downs, the explosive anger when she disappointed him. And finally, the physical abuse, carefully hidden bruises and excuses about her clumsiness. When she'd finally found the courage to leave him, she discovered she was pregnant. That night, Marcus had beaten her so severely she'd nearly lost the baby. If her neighbor hadn't heard her screams and called the police, she might not have survived. After Marcus's arrest and conviction, Emma had been terrified. His final words to her in the courtroom still haunted her. "When I get out, I'll find you and our child. You can't hide forever." She'd used the opportunity while he was incarcerated to disappear completely. With the help of a victims advocacy group, she'd changed her name, moved to Des Moines, and started over as Rebecca Mitchell. She'd been careful, meticulous in creating her new identity, never using social media, never contacting anyone from her old life. Then she met David Blackwood at a coffee shop, where she'd been working on freelance design projects. Handsome, kind-hearted David, who saw past her guarded exterior, and slowly patiently earned her trust. When he proposed after a year of dating, she'd said yes, convinced that her past was truly behind her. David had adopted Oliver when they married, never questioning Rebecca's vague explanation about a brief relationship with a man who wanted nothing to do with their child. For 7 years they'd been happy. Rebecca had almost convinced herself that Emma Lawson no longer existed, that the frightened, broken young woman had been nothing more than a bad dream. Until today, the rain intensified, matching Rebecca's darkening thoughts. She should have known better, should have been more careful, should have told David the truth years ago. Now her son was potentially in danger, and she had no idea what Marcus might be planning. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. David's name flashed on the screen. She connected the call through the car's Bluetooth system. "Hey, I got your note," David said, his voice tinny through the car speakers. "Everything okay with this client emergency?" Rebecca swallowed hard. Another lie to add to the mountain of deception between them. "Yeah. Just a last-minute panic about a design for their product launch. Should be back tomorrow." "In this weather? The forecast says the storm's getting worse. Maybe you should wait until—" "I can't," she interrupted, more sharply than intended. "It's too important." A pause. "Bick, is everything all right? You sound strange." The concern in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Just stressed about this deadline. I'll call you when I get there, okay?" "Okay," David said, clearly not convinced. "Drive safely. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered, ending the call. 2 hours into the drive, Rebecca stopped at a gas station to refuel and check her phone. Still no response from Martha or Richard. She tried calling the lake house again. No answer. The anxiety that had been simmering in her stomach rose to a full boil. As she stood by the pump, rain pelting her jacket, a notification appeared on her phone. A text from Martha with another photo. This one showed Oliver inside the lake house, playing a board game with Richard. The message read, "Rainy day fun. Signal's terrible here. Call dropped 3 times trying to reach you. Everything okay?" Rebecca examined the photo carefully, looking for any sign of danger, any indication that Martha and Richard sensed something was wrong. Everything looked normal. Oliver was smiling, his concentration focused on the game. Richard's familiar laugh lines were crinkled in amusement. The cozy lakehouse interior looked exactly as she remembered it from previous visits. She texted back, "On my way to the lake. Emergency. Will explain when I get there. Don't leave the house. Lock all doors and windows. Please trust me on this." Whether Martha would receive the message in the spotty reception area was uncertain, but Rebecca had to try. She finished refueling and got back on the road, pushing the speed limit despite the dangerous weather conditions. As she neared Lake Shawnee, the rain finally began to ease, but darkness was falling. The road wound through dense forest, the trees creating long shadows across the wet pavement. She knew she was getting close when she passed the weathered sign for Shawnee Marina, just 5 miles from the Blackwoods Lake House. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. Rebecca's finger hovered over the decline button, but something made her answer instead. "Hello?" she said, cautiously. There was silence on the other end. Then a voice she had hoped never to hear again. "Hello, Emma. It's been a long time." Rebecca nearly drove off the road. She pulled onto the shoulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Marcus," she whispered. "You know you did an impressive job disappearing," he continued, his voice eerily calm. "Changed your name, your hair, moved across the country. But you made one mistake." Rebecca couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "You kept in touch with your old college roommate, Jessie. Remember her? She's the one who told me about your new husband, about my son, about the beautiful lake house his grandparents own on Lake Shawnee. If you touch my son," Rebecca began, her voice shaking with fury and fear. "Our son," Marcus corrected. "And I've already met him. Nice kid, bright, looks just like me around the eyes, don't you think?" Horror flooded through her. "What have you done?" "Nothing. Yet?" Marcus's voice hardened. "I've been watching, learning about the life you built while I rotted in prison. The life you stole from me." "You're on parole," Rebecca said, desperately trying to sound calmer than she felt. "If you violate the terms, my parole officer thinks I'm on a fishing trip in Wisconsin. By the time anyone realizes differently, I'll be long gone. With my son." "Please," Rebecca begged, all pretense of strength evaporating. "Please don't do this. Oliver doesn't know you. He'll be scared. He'll learn to know me." Marcus cut in. "I'm his father. Something you decided to hide from him. From everyone. What do you want?" Rebecca asked, her mind racing for solutions, for escape routes, for anything that might protect Oliver. "Meet me at the old boathouse on the north side of the lake. Midnight. Come alone. No police. We're going to have a long overdue family reunion." The line went dead. Rebecca sat frozen, staring at her phone. The boathouse, on the opposite side of the lake from the Blackwoods property, an isolated, abandoned structure that had been there for decades. The perfect place for an ambush. She had less than 3 hours until midnight. 3 hours to figure out how to save her son from the monster who had nearly killed them both 8 years ago. With shaking hands, Rebecca put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. Whether she was driving toward salvation or doom, she couldn't say. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would die before she let Marcus take Oliver. Chapter 3. Fractured trust. The Blackwoods Lake House appeared through the trees as Rebecca navigated the narrow, winding gravel road. It was a rustic 2-story cabin, with a large deck overlooking the water, warm light spilling from its windows into the damp evening air. Under different circumstances, the sight would have filled Rebecca with peace. Now it only intensified her fear. She parked beside Martha and Richard's SUV, and rushed to the front door, pounding her fist against the weathered wood. Seconds later, Martha opened it, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Rebecca, what on earth? Where's Oliver?" Rebecca demanded, pushing past her mother-in-law into the house. "He's upstairs with Richard, getting ready for bed," Martha answered, closing the door behind her. "Rebecca, what's going on? Your text had us worried sick." Rebecca scanned the living room, noting the board game still laid out on the coffee table, 2 mugs of what looked like hot chocolate beside it. Everything appeared normal, but the call from Marcus had her on high alert, searching for any sign of disturbance or danger. "I need to see him, now." Without waiting for a response, Rebecca bounded up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. She found Oliver in the small bathroom, Richard helping him brush his teeth. At the sight of his mother, Oliver's eyes widened with delight. "Mom," he exclaimed around a mouthful of toothpaste. "What are you doing here? Did you come to fish with us?" Rebecca dropped to her knees, pulling her son into a fierce hug, uncaring about the toothpaste that smeared onto her shirt. She ran her hands over his head, his shoulders, checking him for any signs of harm. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did anyone talk to you today? Anyone you didn't know?" Oliver pulled back, his expression confused. "I'm okay. Grandpa and I caught a fish, and I found cool rocks." Richard placed a protective hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Rebecca, you're scaring him. What's this about?" "I saw someone," she said vaguely, not wanting to say too much in front of Oliver. "Someone dangerous. Near the lake." Richard's brow furrowed. "We haven't seen anyone unusual. It's been just us all day." Martha appeared in the doorway, her face lined with worry. "Oliver, honey, why don't you finish getting ready for bed? Grandpa will read you a story in a few minutes. I need to talk to your mom." Oliver looked between the adults, sensing the tension. "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Rebecca assured him, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine. I just missed you so much I had to come see you. Go on with Grandpa now." Once Oliver was settled in his room with Richard, Martha led Rebecca downstairs to the kitchen. She filled a kettle and placed it on the stove, her movements deliberately calm. "Now," Martha said firmly, turning to face her daughter-in-law, "you're going to tell me exactly what's happening, and don't say nothing because you don't drive 3 hours in a storm and burst in here like a mad woman over nothing." Rebecca sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her strength finally failing her. Where to even begin? How much could she reveal without telling Martha everything? "I saw someone in the background of the photo you sent," she said finally. "Someone dangerous. Someone who might want to hurt Oliver." Martha's face paled. "What? Who would want to hurt Oliver?" "It's complicated. It's from before David, before all of this." Rebecca gestured vaguely around them. "You mean Oliver's biological father?" Martha asked quietly. Rebecca's head snapped up in surprise. Martha sighed, sitting across from her. "Dear, we've always known Oliver wasn't David's biological child. The timing alone made that obvious. David told us when you two got serious, that you'd been through something traumatic, that you were starting over. We never pushed for details because it wasn't our place." "David knows," Rebecca whispered, the floor seeming to tilt beneath her. "Not the specifics, I don't think. Just that there was someone before him who hurt you." Martha reached across the table and took Rebecca's trembling hands in her own. "Is that who you saw? Oliver's real father?" The kettle began to whistle. Martha rose to silence it, pouring hot water into 2 mugs with tea bags already waiting. She placed one in front of Rebecca, who wrapped her cold fingers around it gratefully. "His name is Marcus Harlow," Rebecca said, the name feeling like acid on her tongue. "We were together in college. He was abusive. When I tried to leave him, I found out I was pregnant. He nearly killed me when I told him I was leaving anyway." She took a shuddering breath. "He went to prison. I changed my name, moved away, started over, met David, and now this Marcus is out," Martha concluded. "And he's found you?" Rebecca nodded miserably. "He called me on my way here. He's been watching the lake house, watching Oliver. He wants to meet me at midnight, at the old boathouse on the North Shore. We need to call the police," Martha said immediately, reaching for her phone. "No." Rebecca caught her wrist. "He said no police," or she couldn't finish the sentence. "Please, Martha. I need to handle this my way." Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What's your plan?" "I'll meet him. Try to reason with him. Maybe offer him money to disappear again." "That's not a plan. That's suicide," Martha retorted. "This man nearly killed you once before. You think he won't do it again?" "I don't have a choice," Rebecca insisted. "If I don't show up, he might come here, for Oliver." Martha's expression hardened with determination. "Then we need a better plan than you walking into a trap alone." She glanced at the clock on the microwave. "It's 9:30 now. We have time to figure this out. For the next hour, they talked in hushed voices, mapping out a strategy. Richard joined them after Oliver fell asleep, his initial shock at Rebecca's revelations giving way to grim resolve. These people, her in-laws who she'd feared would reject her if they ever learned the truth, instead rallied around her with a protectiveness that brought tears to her eyes. At 10:45, Rebecca's phone rang again. David's name flashed on the screen. "I have to take this," she said to Martha and Richard. "But I can't tell him, not like this. Not over the phone." Martha nodded in understanding. "We'll check on Oliver." Rebecca stepped onto the deck to take the call, the night air cool against her skin. "Hey," she answered, trying to sound normal. "Hey yourself," David replied. "Just checking in. Did you make it to Cedar Rapids okay?" The lie she'd told him felt like a physical weight crushing her chest. "Actually, I'm not in Cedar Rapids." A pause. "Okay. Where are you then?" "I'm at your parents' lake house, with Oliver." The lake house, confusion colored his voice. "Why? What's going on, Beck?" "It's complicated," she said, the words utterly inadequate. "Something came up, something I need to deal with. I can't explain right now, but I will, I promise, when I get home." "You're scaring me," David said, his voice tense. "Is Oliver okay? Are my parents okay?" "Yes, they're fine. Everyone's fine, for now." "David, I have to go. I'll call you tomorrow." "Rebecca, wait, I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "No matter what happens, no matter what you might hear about me, please remember that I love you, more than anything." She ended the call before he could respond, then turned off her phone entirely. No more distractions, no more temptations to confess everything and beg for help. This was her mess to fix. When she went back inside, Martha handed her a mug of coffee. "Drink this. You need to stay alert." Richard was at the kitchen table, cleaning what appeared to be an old revolver. Rebecca's eyes widened at the sight. "Standard protection out here in the woods," Richard explained, noticing her expression. "Never had to use it, but tonight might be the exception." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "No guns. If something went wrong, if Oliver got hurt, it's just a precaution," Richard assured her. "I pray we won't need it." At 11:30, they went over the plan one final time. Martha would stay at the lake house with Oliver. Richard would drive Rebecca to a spot near the boathouse, then position himself in the woods nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. Rebecca would meet Marcus alone, as he demanded, and try to negotiate. If things went south, she had a small canister of pepper spray in her pocket, and a whistle around her neck. It wasn't much of a plan, they all knew it, but it was all they had. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca crept upstairs to look at Oliver one last time. He was sleeping peacefully, his favorite stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm, his sandy hair tousled against the pillow. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "I love you, little man," she whispered. "More than you'll ever know." Then she straightened her shoulders and walked out, ready to face the demon from her past, ready to do whatever it took to keep her son safe. Chapter 4, Midnight Reckoning. The old boathouse loomed before her, a dark silhouette against the night sky. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting silver light across the lake's surface and illuminating the dilapidated structure just enough for Rebecca to make out its weathered contours. Years of neglect had left it listing slightly to one side, its wood grayed and splintered, windows broken or boarded up. Richard had dropped her off a quarter-mile away, as planned. He was now positioned somewhere in the dense woods that surrounded the boathouse, close enough to hear the whistle if she needed help, but far enough away to remain undetected. Rebecca checked her watch. 11:58 p.m. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the pepper spray in her jacket pocket, the whistle cool against her throat. Then she walked the final stretch of overgrown path to the boathouse entrance. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as she pushed it open. The interior was pitch black, the smell of damp wood and stagnant water assaulting her nostrils. "Marcus," she called, her voice echoing in the darkness. A click, and suddenly a beam of light cut through the blackness. The flashlight moved, illuminating a face that had haunted her nightmares for years. Marcus Harlow had aged during his time in prison, but not as much as she might have expected. His once clean-shaven face now sported a neatly trimmed beard. His dark hair was longer, styled back from his forehead. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, casual, unremarkable clothes that would blend in around the lake community. What hadn't changed were his eyes, cold, calculating, with that same glint of controlled rage she remembered so well. "Right on time," he said, his voice eerily pleasant. "You always were punctual, one of your better qualities." Rebecca remained near the door, maintaining as much distance between them as possible. "Let's skip the small talk. What do you want?" Marcus chuckled, setting the flashlight on a weathered table so that it illuminated the space between them. Direct as ever. "Fine. I want what's mine. My son. Oliver is not yours." Rebecca spat. "You lost any right to him the night you tried to kill us both." "A regrettable loss of temper," Marcus said with a dismissive wave. "I've had 7 years to reflect on my mistakes, to plan how to make things right. There's nothing right about terrorizing a child and his mother." "I haven't terrorized anyone," Marcus countered, his tone reasonable. "I simply want to meet my son, to be part of his life." "That's not going to happen." Rebecca's voice was steel. "Oliver has a father, a good man who loves him, who's raised him from infancy." A flash of rage distorted Marcus's features before he regained control. "A substitute. A pale imitation. Blood matters, Emma. Family matters. My name is Rebecca now, not to me." Marcus took a step closer, and Rebecca instinctively reached for the pepper spray. He noticed the movement and stopped, hands raised in mock surrender. "I'm not here to hurt you, I just want to talk." "About what?" "How you're going to kidnap my son. How you tracked us down after all these years." "I told you. Your friend Jessie." She was reluctant at first, but persuasive. "You should be more careful who you trust." Rebecca's mind raced. Jessie, her college roommate, the only person from her past she'd maintained any contact with. They'd exchanged Christmas cards, the occasional email. Jessie knew she'd married someone named David, knew she had a son, but little else. Rebecca had been careful, or so she thought. "What did you do to her?" Rebecca demanded. "Nothing permanent," Marcus replied with a shrug. "I can be very convincing when motivated, and I was extremely motivated to find my son." "What do you really want, Marcus? Money? Is that it?" "Because I'll pay you, whatever I can afford, if you'll leave us alone." Marcus's laugh was cold. "You think this is about money? I have money. What I don't have is my flesh and blood, my legacy. Oliver doesn't know you. He doesn't want to know you. Taking him would traumatize him. Children are adaptable. He'll adjust." Rebecca felt sick. There was no reasoning with him, no appeal to empathy or compassion. The man before her was just as narcissistic, just as dangerous as the one she'd fled years ago. "I won't let you take him," she said, her hand closing around the pepper spray in her pocket. "You don't have a choice." Marcus's voice hardened. "Either you introduce me to my son willingly, or I take him, and if I have to take him, things get much messier." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Marcus said, taking another step closer, "that I know everything about your new life, Rebecca Mitchell. I know about the fraudulent identity you created. I know about the money you embezzled from your former employer to fund your disappearance. I know you never told your husband about your past, about me." Rebecca's blood ran cold. The money, $20,000 she'd stolen from the architectural firm where she'd worked as an assistant. She'd been desperate, terrified, pregnant and alone. The money had paid for her new identity, her relocation, the first few months of rent until she could find work. She'd justified it as necessary for survival, but it was still theft. "If I have to," Marcus continued, "I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything. You'll go to jail. Oliver will be left without a mother, and as his biological father, with no criminal record involving him, I'll be granted custody." "No criminal record," Rebecca repeated incredulously. "You nearly beat me to death. A domestic violence conviction from years ago, for which I've served my time and completed extensive rehabilitation. Meanwhile, you've been living under a false identity, committing ongoing fraud. Who do you think the courts will favor?" The worst part was that he might be right. The legal system that had failed so many domestic violence victims could fail her again, especially with the added complications of her own crimes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You never wanted children. You were furious when I told you I was pregnant." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through the calculated facade. Prison changes a man, makes him think about legacy. "About what matters?" "Oliver matters," Rebecca insisted. "His happiness, his stability, his sense of security, those matter, and you're threatening all of that." "I'm his father," Marcus suddenly shouted, his control slipping. "You had no right to take him from me, to let another man raise him, to make him believe he's someone he's not. The outburst confirmed what Rebecca had suspected. This wasn't about love for Oliver, it was about possession, about Marcus's sense of ownership, his bruised ego at being replaced. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice once again eerily calm after the outburst. "You're going to take me back to the lake house. You're going to introduce me to my son as an old friend. Tomorrow, you're going to start telling him the truth, that I'm his real father. We'll take it slow, build a relationship. Eventually he'll come to live with me, at least part-time. And if I refuse, then I go to the police tonight, with evidence." He pulled out his phone, showing her screen captures of her old emails to Jesse, documents that proved her original identity, even a recording of Jesse's tearful confession about what she knew of Rebecca's past. Rebecca's mind raced, searching for options, for escape routes, for any way to protect Oliver from this nightmare. And then, just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she heard it, a vehicle approaching outside, tires crunching on gravel. Marcus heard it too. His head snapped toward the door, eyes narrowing. "Who's that? I told you to come alone." "I did," Rebecca insisted, genuinely confused. Richard was supposed to be hiding in the woods, not driving up to the boathouse. Headlights swept across the broken windows, a car door slammed. Then, a voice called out, a voice that made Rebecca's heart stop. "Rebecca, are you in there?" David. Somehow, impossibly, David was here. Marcus's expression darkened with fury. "Your husband? You brought your husband?" His hand moved to his waistband, pulling out a small handgun Rebecca hadn't noticed before. "No, I swear I didn't know," Rebecca began, but Marcus was already striding toward her, grabbing her arm with bruising force and pressing the gun against her side. "Not a word," he hissed in her ear. "Or I'll shoot him the moment he walks through that door." The boathouse door creaked open wider, and David stepped into the dim space, his silhouette framed by moonlight. "Beak," he called, squinting into the darkness. "I saw the light. What's going on?" Rebecca stood frozen, Marcus's iron grip on her arm, the gun pressed against her ribs. One wrong move, one wrong word, and David could die. Oliver could lose his father, the only real father he'd ever known. "David," she managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady despite her terror. "You shouldn't be here." David took another step inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, finally seeing her, and the man holding her captive. "What the hell?" He moved forward, instinctively. "Stop right there," Marcus commanded, shifting the gun so it was now visibly pointed at Rebecca's side. "One more step and she dies." David froze, his expression shifting from confusion to cold fury as he processed the scene before him. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm the man whose life she stole," Marcus replied. "The man whose child she took." Understanding dawned on David's face as his gaze locked with Rebecca's. In that moment, a silent communication passed between them, apology, forgiveness, resolve. Then David turned his attention back to Marcus. "Let her go," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Whatever your grievance is with Rebecca, this isn't the way to resolve it." Marcus laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the damp space. "You know nothing about what she's done, what she's taken from me. You're raising my son." David's expression didn't waver. "I know enough. I know she's my wife, and Oliver is my son in every way that matters." "Did she tell you she stole from her employer, that she's been living under a false identity for 8 years, that she's a liar and a thief?" Marcus tightened his grip on Rebecca, causing her to wince. "I've always known there were things in her past she couldn't talk about," David replied steadily, "things that hurt her too much to revisit. I didn't need the details to love her." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. All this time, she'd feared David would reject her if he knew the truth, when in reality, he'd accepted that there were parts of her he might never fully understand, and loved her anyway. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother-in-law called," David explained, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "She didn't tell me everything, just enough that you were in danger, that it involved Oliver's biological father. I drove straight here from Des Moines." "How touching," Marcus sneered. "The devoted husband rushing to the rescue, except there's no rescue happening tonight." He shifted the gun slightly, pointing it more directly at Rebecca's side. "Here's what's going to happen. You're both going to come with me to the lake house. We're going to wake up my son, and you," he jabbed the gun painfully into Rebecca's ribs, "are going to tell him the truth, that I'm his real father. Then we're all going to leave together. One big happy family reunion." "You're insane," Rebecca breathed. "Oliver will be terrified. He'll adjust." Marcus repeated his earlier assertion. "Kids are resilient." David took a careful step forward, ignoring Marcus's warning gesture with the gun. "Think about what you're doing. Traumatizing a child. Is that really going to make him want to know you, to love you?" For a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's face. Then his expression hardened once more. "Enough talk, we're leaving, now." He began moving toward the door, dragging Rebecca with him, the gun still pressed against her side. David stood his ground, blocking their path. "Move," Marcus ordered. No, David's refusal was simple, but absolute. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion and sound. Marcus shoved Rebecca aside, turning the gun toward David. Rebecca screamed a warning, as her ex-husband's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, the boathouse door burst open with a tremendous crash. Richard Blackwood charged in like an avenging angel, his massive frame tackling Marcus with the force of a linebacker. The gun discharged, the bullet splintering wood somewhere above their heads. The two men crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, each fighting for control of the weapon. David rushed to Rebecca, pulling her away from the struggling men. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her arms, her face. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her entire body was trembling with adrenaline. "Help Richard." David turned toward the fight just as another shot rang out. For one terrible moment, the entire world seemed to freeze. Then Richard slumped backward, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Marcus stumbled to his feet, the gun wavering in his hand, his expression wild with panic and rage. "No!" David roared, launching himself at Marcus without hesitation. The two men collided, the gun firing once more as they grappled for it. Rebecca rushed to Richard's side, pressing her hands over the wound in his shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding. "Richard, stay with me," she pleaded, as the older man's eyes fluttered. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." Across the boathouse, David and Marcus continued their desperate struggle. Despite Marcus's prison-honed physique, David fought with the righteous fury of a man protecting his family. He managed to slam Marcus's gun hand against the edge of the weathered table. The weapon clattered to the floor, spinning away into the shadows. Disarmed but far from defeated, Marcus drove his fist into David's stomach, then his face. David staggered back but didn't fall. With a roar, he charged forward again, tackling Marcus into the wall. The impact was so forceful that one of the boathouse's rotting support beams cracked. Dust and splinters rained down as the structure groaned ominously around them. "Rebecca, get Richard out of here," David shouted, ducking another of Marcus's punches. "The whole place is coming down." Rebecca looked down at Richard, who was now unconscious, his breathing shallow. She couldn't possibly move him by herself, and she couldn't leave David alone with Marcus. She was trapped in an impossible choice. Then through the chaos, she heard the most terrifying sound imaginable: sirens, growing louder, drawing closer to the boathouse. Had someone called the police? Martha perhaps? Or had someone heard the gunshots? Marcus heard it too. His head snapped toward the sound, momentary panic crossing his features. David seized the opportunity, driving his fist into Marcus's jaw with bone-crushing force. Marcus stumbled backward, tripping over debris, falling hard against another support beam. This impact was the final straw for the decrepit structure. With a thunderous crack, the beam split entirely, sending part of the roof collapsing inward. David threw himself toward Rebecca and Richard, shielding them with his body as dust and timber crashed down around them. When the debris settled, Marcus was nowhere to be seen. The entire back portion of the boathouse had collapsed, leaving a gaping hole that opened onto the dark waters of the lake. "Marcus," Rebecca called, coughing through the dust. There was no response. The wail of sirens was right outside now. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, as police officers swarmed the entrance, weapons drawn. "Police, don't move," a commanding voice shouted. "Help us," David called back. "My father's been shot." The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance lights, police questions, and hospital corridors. Richard was rushed into emergency surgery to remove the bullet from his shoulder. The doctors were optimistic. No major arteries had been hit, and while he'd lost blood, he was stable. A search team was dispatched to the lake, looking for any sign of Marcus. By dawn, they'd found nothing but his waterlogged phone, washed up on the shore about 100 yards from the collapsed boathouse. Rebecca sat in the hospital waiting room, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, answering a detective's questions as honestly as she could. She admitted everything: her real identity, the money she'd stolen, her history with Marcus, all of it. David sat beside her, holding her hand through every painful revelation. When the detective finally left, promising to return the next day for formal statements, Rebecca turned to her husband, her eyes red from exhaustion and tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you everything years ago. I was just so afraid of losing you, of losing Oliver." David drew her into his arms, holding her against his chest so tightly she could feel his heartbeat. "You never had to be afraid of that," he murmured against her hair. "Never. But the things I did, the lies, the theft, you did what you had to do to survive," David interrupted. "To protect our son. I understand that, Rebecca. Or Emma. Whichever name you prefer." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with wonder. "You're not angry?" "I'm furious," he corrected. "But not at you. At a world that made you feel you had no other options. At a system that failed to protect you. At a man who hurt you so badly, you had to reinvent yourself to feel safe." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "But mostly, I'm just grateful you're alive. That we're all alive." A nurse appeared in the waiting room doorway. "Mr. Blackwood, your father is out of surgery. He's asking for you." They found Richard in recovery, pale but alert. Martha was already at his side, clutching his hand as if she'd never let go again. When they entered, Richard's eyes immediately sought Rebecca's. "Did they find him?" he asked, his voice rough from intubation. Rebecca shook her head. "Not yet. They're still searching the lake." Richard nodded, then winced at the movement. "I should have gotten there sooner, should have been faster. You saved our lives," David said firmly, placing a hand on his father's uninjured shoulder. "All of us." "Oliver?" Richard asked, concern evident in his tired eyes. "Still at the lake house with the police officer you sent," Martha assured him. "Sleeping through all of this, thank God." Rebecca hadn't known about the officer, another part of Martha and Richard's contingency plan apparently. The older couple had thought of everything, risking their own safety to protect her and Oliver. The depth of their love and loyalty overwhelmed her. "I need to tell you all something," she said suddenly, unable to contain the truth any longer. "My real name is Emma Lawson. I was born in Oak Ridge, about 2 hours north of here. 8 years ago, I stole money from the architectural firm where I worked and used it to create a new identity after Marcus was arrested." The words tumbled out, years of secrets finally exposed to the light. "The police know everything now. I'll probably face charges for the theft, maybe for identity fraud too." Martha reached across Richard's bed to take Rebecca's hand. "Then we'll face it together, as a family." "That money," Richard said, his voice gaining strength, "it was survival money. Any decent lawyer will argue that. And we know some very good lawyers," David added, his arm tightening around Rebecca's waist. For the first time since she'd seen Marcus's face in that photograph, Rebecca felt something like hope. Whatever came next, legal battles, financial penalties, the painful process of reclaiming her original identity, she wouldn't face it alone. As dawn broke over the hospital, casting golden light through the windows of Richard's room, Rebecca made a silent promise to herself and to Oliver. No more secrets, no more running. It was time to face her past head-on, to build a future on truth rather than fear. And if Marcus was still out there somewhere, watching, waiting, she would be ready. Because now she had something she'd lacked 8 years ago, not just the fierce love of a mother, but the strength of a family that would stand beside her, no matter what. Chapter 5, Shattered Mirrors. 3 months passed. Autumn descended on Des Moines, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson. The investigation into Marcus Harlow's disappearance continued, but with diminishing resources and fading urgency. The prevailing theory among law enforcement was that he had drowned in Lake Shawnee that night, his body possibly trapped beneath the collapsed boathouse, or carried away by the lake's currents. Rebecca wanted to believe it, needed to believe it, But something in her gut refused to accept that Marcus was truly gone. The man she'd known was too determined, too calculating, to die so arbitrarily. Life, however, had to go on. Richard had recovered from his gunshot wound, though he still attended physical therapy twice a week. The legal consequences of Rebecca's revelations had been less severe than she'd feared. The architectural firm she'd stolen from 8 years earlier chose not to press charges after hearing the full story, a mercy she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure she deserved. The process of reclaiming her identity as Emma Lawson, while maintaining her legal status as Rebecca Mitchell Blackwood, was complex and ongoing. Lawyers, paperwork, court appearances, each step required David's unwavering support, which he gave without hesitation. Oliver had been told a carefully edited version of events, that his mother had once had a different name, that she had been friends with a man named Marcus, who was not a good person, and had tried to hurt her, that his grandpa Richard had been brave, and stopped the bad man. At 8 years old, Oliver accepted this simplified truth, with remarkable resilience, though he sometimes woke from nightmares he couldn't articulate. Today was significant. Rebecca's first session with a new therapist, someone specialized in trauma and domestic violence recovery. David had encouraged her to go, to address the wounds that had been reopened by Marcus's reappearance. She sat in the waiting room of Dr. Elena Patel's office, her fingers absently twisting the strap of her purse. The space was designed to be soothing, soft lighting, comfortable furniture, gentle colors, but Rebecca's nerves refused to be calmed. Mrs. Blackwood, a woman, appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her smile warm and professional. "I'm Dr. Patel, please come in." Rebecca followed her into a comfortable office, taking a seat in a plush armchair across from the therapist's desk. "Before we begin," Dr. Patel said, consulting a tablet, "I want to clarify something. Your paperwork indicates your legal name is Rebecca Mitchell Blackwood, but you're in the process of acknowledging your birth name, Emma Lawson. Which name would you prefer I use?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. She'd been so focused on the legal and practical aspects of reclaiming her identity, that she hadn't fully considered the emotional implications. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I've been Rebecca for so long now. It's who I am to my husband, to my son. But Emma was who I was before." Dr. Patel nodded, her expression compassionate. "Identity is complex, especially when trauma is involved. We don't have to decide right now. Part of our work together might be exploring what each name represents to you." They spent the next hour discussing Rebecca's history, her relationship with Marcus, the abuse she'd endured, her escape and reinvention, and finally the events at Lake Shawnee 3 months earlier. "What concerns you most now?" Dr. Patel asked, as their session neared its end. "What keeps you up at night?" Rebecca considered the question. "The not knowing," she finally said. "Not knowing if he's really dead, not knowing if we're truly safe." And she hesitated. "Not knowing who I am anymore." Rebecca was built on lies, but those lies protected me, protected Oliver. Emma was real, but she was victimized, broken. "I don't know how to reconcile them." "Perhaps you don't have to," Dr. Patel suggested. "Perhaps the person you're becoming now is neither entirely Rebecca nor entirely Emma, but someone new, someone who carries the strength of both." The idea resonated with Rebecca in a way she hadn't expected. She left the session feeling lighter somehow, as if a path forward might be possible after all. When she arrived home, the house was quiet. David was still at work, and Oliver was at a friend's house for a playdate. Rebecca welcomed the solitude, using the time to process her therapy session as she prepared dinner. She was chopping vegetables when her phone rang. Unknown number. Her hand froze, knife suspended above the cutting board. Since Lake Shawnee, unknown calls triggered an immediate fight-or-flight response. Usually she let them go to voicemail. Today something compelled her to answer. "Hello, Mrs. Blackwood," a woman's voice unfamiliar. "Yes, this is she. This is Detective Morales from the Shawnee County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about Marcus Harlow." Rebecca's grip tightened on the knife. "Have you found him?" A slight hesitation. "Not exactly. We've received a report that someone matching his description was seen at a gas station about 60 miles north of Lake Shawnee, 2 days after the incident at the boathouse." 2 days after, Rebecca repeated, her voice faint. "That would mean that he survived." "Yes. The sighting wasn't reported until now, because the witness just came forward after seeing Harlow's photo in a local paper. We're investigating. But I wanted to inform you directly. Rebecca sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "Do you think it's credible?" "Credible enough to warrant precautions," Detective Morales replied. "We're increasing patrols in your area, and I'd advise you to be vigilant. Make sure your home security is updated. Don't establish patterns that are easy to track." After ending the call, Rebecca sat motionless at the kitchen table, the half-chopped vegetables forgotten. All these months of gradually rebuilding her sense of safety, of allowing herself to believe the nightmare might be over, all shattered by a single phone call. When David arrived home with Oliver an hour later, he immediately sensed something was wrong. After getting their son settled with homework, he found Rebecca still at the kitchen table, dinner preparations abandoned. "Big," he said gently, using the nickname she'd decided to keep. "What happened?" She told him about the detective's call, watching his expression shift from concern to grim determination. "We're not doing this again," he said firmly. "We're not living in fear. If Marcus is alive, if he comes anywhere near our family, he'll regret it. David, he had a gun. He shot your father. He's dangerous. And we're prepared now." David took her hands in his. "We have security systems, police awareness, legal protections. We have the truth on our side. No more secrets for him to exploit." Rebecca wanted to believe him, wanted to share his confidence. But the memory of Marcus's cold eyes, of the gun pressed against her ribs, was too vivid to dismiss. That night, after Oliver was asleep, Rebecca and David reviewed their home security measures. New locks were installed on all doors and windows. Security cameras were added to cover blind spots. An alarm system was scheduled for installation the following day. As they worked, Rebecca found herself studying her husband with new eyes. The man who had fallen in love with her 8 years ago had been gentle, patient, kind, all the things Marcus wasn't. Those qualities remained, but now she saw something else too, a fieriness, a protectiveness that matched her own maternal instincts. "Why didn't you run?" she asked, suddenly, pausing in the middle of programming a security code. "When you found out everything about me, about the lies, about Oliver's real father, why didn't you leave?" David looked up from the instruction manual he was reading, his expression surprised. "It never even occurred to me," he said simply. "You and Oliver are my family. Nothing changes that. But I deceived you. For years, you protected yourself and our son," David corrected. "That's not deception, that's survival." Rebecca moved across the room, wrapping her arms around him, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave. "I don't deserve you," she murmured, against his shoulder. "Nonsense," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "You deserve every good thing this world has to offer. It's just taken the world a while to catch up." For 2 weeks, they lived in a state of heightened vigilance. Oliver wasn't allowed to walk home from the bus stop alone. Rebecca varied her routes to and from work. David insisted on accompanying her to therapy sessions, waiting in the lobby while she spoke with Dr. Patel. Then on a crisp Saturday in late October, Detective Morales called again. "We found his car," she said without preamble. "Abandoned at a long-term parking lot near Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport." "The airport," Rebecca repeated, signaling to David, who was helping Oliver with a science project at the kitchen table. "Records show it was left there 3 days after the incident at Lake Shawnee. We've checked flight manifests for the following 2 days. A man matching Harlow's description boarded a flight to Mexico City." Rebecca pressed a hand to her mouth, not sure whether to feel relief or renewed fear. "Mexico. Yes. We're coordinating with authorities there, but frankly, Mrs. Blackwood, if he's left the country under an alias, he could be difficult to track." After the call ended, Rebecca relayed the information to David, careful to keep her voice low so Oliver wouldn't overhear. "Mexico," David repeated, his brow furrowed. "That's actually a relief. It means he's not here, not nearby, he's fled. Or he wants us to think he has," Rebecca countered. "This could be misdirection." David sighed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "At some point, Bick, we have to decide whether we're going to live our lives, or just survive them. Marcus has already taken so much from you. Don't let him take your peace too." That evening, after Oliver was in bed, Rebecca sat on their back porch, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, distant points of light in the vast emptiness. Patel's words from their first session came back to her. Perhaps the person you're becoming now is neither entirely Rebecca nor entirely Emma, but someone new, someone who carries the strength of both. She rolled the concept around in her mind, testing its weight, its truth. Emma had been vulnerable, trusting, naive, until life taught her otherwise. Rebecca had been careful, guarded, protective, sometimes to the point of isolation. Both were parts of her, fragments of a whole that was still taking shape. David joined her on the porch, handing her a mug of tea before settling into the chair beside her. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars multiply as night deepened. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said finally, "about names, about identity." David turned to look at her, his expression curious. "And? I want to keep Rebecca as my legal name," she said slowly. "It's who I am to you, to Oliver, to the Blackwoods. It's the name I chose for myself when I was rebuilding my life." David nodded, waiting for her to continue. "But I also want to acknowledge Emma, not hide her away anymore. She's part of me too, my history, my beginnings." Rebecca took a sip of tea, gathering her thoughts. "So I thought maybe I could use Emma as a middle name. Rebecca Emma Mitchell Blackwood." "I like it," David said, smiling. "It honors both parts of your journey. Do you think it's strange to essentially name myself?" David considered this. "I think it's empowering. Most of us just accept the names we're given. You're choosing yours with intention, with meaning." Rebecca leaned back in her chair looking up at the stars again. "I want to be done hiding," she said softly. "Whatever happens with Marcus, whether he's in Mexico or somewhere closer, I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want Oliver to grow up seeing his mother stand tall, not constantly looking over her shoulder." "Then that's what we'll do," David said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "Together." Chapter 6 Reflections. Restored spring came to Des Moines, in a riot of color and scent, nature's annual reminder that rebirth was always possible. Rebecca Emma Mitchell Blackwood stood in her backyard, surveying the vegetable garden she'd planted with Oliver the previous weekend. Tiny green shoots were already pushing through the rich soil: tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, herbs. 6 months had passed since the revelation about Marcus potentially fleeing to Mexico. No further sightings had been reported. No strange phone calls or unexplained disturbances had occurred. Slowly, cautiously, Rebecca had allowed herself to relax her vigilance, to believe that perhaps the nightmare truly was over. Oliver thrived, his resilience continually amazing her. The nightmares had faded. His understanding of the complicated truth about his parentage was evolving with his age and maturity. At 8.5, he still viewed David as his father in every way that mattered, but he had questions about Marcus. Questions Rebecca answered as honestly as she could, in age-appropriate terms. "Mom," Oliver called from the back door, "Grandma and Grandpa are here." Rebecca smiled, brushing soil from her gardening gloves. Martha and Richard visited every month now, their bond with Rebecca strengthened by the events at Lake Shawnee, rather than weakened by the revelations that had followed. Inside, she found Richard examining Oliver's latest Lego creation, while Martha unpacked containers of homemade food in the kitchen. "I brought that casserole you liked last time," Martha said, giving Rebecca a warm hug. And Richard insisted on bringing his famous chocolate chip cookies for Oliver. "They are famous," Richard protested good-naturedly. "At least in this family." Rebecca hugged them both, still sometimes overwhelmed by the unconditional acceptance they'd shown her. Their support had been unwavering, through the legal proceedings, the therapy, the gradual process of integrating Emma Lawson back into Rebecca Blackwood's life. David arrived home from work early, and the family gathered around the dining table for an impromptu feast. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Oliver's enthusiastic accounts of school and his upcoming baseball season. Later, after Oliver had gone upstairs to finish homework, the adults settled in the living room with coffee. Richard, now fully recovered from his gunshot wound, though he sometimes rubbed his shoulder when he thought no one was looking, brought up the subject they'd all been avoiding. "Any word from the detective?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Rebecca shook her head. "Nothing new. The Mexican authorities haven't been able to confirm his presence there. The case is still open, but it's not active, unless new evidence emerges." "And how do you feel about that?" Martha asked gently. Rebecca considered the question, rolling her coffee mug between her palms. 6 months ago, I would have said it wasn't enough, that I needed absolute certainty he was gone for good. Now," she glanced at David, drawing strength from his steady presence. Now I think I've accepted that certainty might never come, and that's okay. I refuse to let the possibility of his existence somewhere in the world control my life. That's my girl, Richard said approvingly. After Martha and Richard left, promising to return for Oliver's first baseball game the following weekend, Rebecca and David cleaned up the kitchen together, moving in the synchronized rhythm of a couple who had weathered storms and emerged stronger. "I've been meaning to show you something," David said, as they finished loading the dishwasher. He disappeared into his home office, returning with a large envelope. "It came in the mail today." Rebecca wiped her hands on a dish towel before accepting the envelope. Inside, she found official-looking documents, legal paperwork finalizing her name change to Rebecca Emma Mitchell Blackwood. "It's done," she said softly, running her fingers over the embossed seal. "Really done." David wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "How does it feel?" "Like completion," she decided, after a moment's reflection. "Like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place." That night, Rebecca dreamed of Lake Shawnee, not as it had been during the confrontation with Marcus, but as it had been during happier visits. In the dream, she stood on the dock where Oliver had been photographed that fateful day, but the atmosphere was peaceful, the water calm and inviting. She woke feeling oddly refreshed, as if the dream had cleansed something within her. David still slept beside her, his breathing deep and even. Through the window, she could see the first hint of dawn lightening the sky. Careful not to wake her husband, Rebecca slipped out of bed and padded down the hall to Oliver's room. She opened the door just enough to see him sleeping, one arm flung over his head, the other clutching his stuffed dinosaur. The sight of him, safe, secure, loved, filled her with a fierce joy. This was what mattered. This moment, this life they'd built together, not the shadows of the past, not the uncertainties of the future, but the present, solid and real and good. Rebecca returned to bed, curling against David's warmth. He stirred slightly, wrapping an arm around her without fully waking. In that moment of perfect peace, she made a decision. Today would be the day she finally closed the last door to her past. After breakfast, while David took Oliver to his friend's house for a Saturday playdate, Rebecca drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Unit 237 contained the only physical remnants of Emma Lawson's existence, a small box of mementos she'd never been able to bring herself to destroy, even in her most paranoid moments. The box held photographs from her childhood, her high school diploma, a journal from her freshman year of college, and a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. Items too precious to abandon entirely, but too dangerous to keep in her home while Marcus remained a threat. Now she was reclaiming them. These weren't just Emma's possessions anymore, they were Rebecca's history, part of the complete person she was finally allowing herself to become. As she lifted the box from its dusty shelf, her phone rang. Unknown number. The old fear flickered briefly, then subsided. Rebecca answered without hesitation. "Hello, Mrs. Blackwood? This is Detective Morales." Rebecca's hand tightened on the box. "Detective, has something happened?" "Yes, actually. Something significant. I'm calling because we've confirmed Marcus Harlow's location." Rebecca's heart lurched. "Where is he?" "He's dead, Mrs. Blackwood. His body was discovered in a remote area outside Mexico City. He'd been there for months, since shortly after he fled the United States." The box slipped from Rebecca's suddenly numb fingers, thumping to the concrete floor of the storage unit. "Dead?" she repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "How? Are you certain it's him?" "Dental records confirm it," Detective Morales replied. "As for how, the Mexican authorities are treating it as a homicide. He appears to have gotten involved with some dangerous people after crossing the border. Wrong place, wrong time." Rebecca sank to the floor beside the fallen box, her mind struggling to process this information. Marcus was dead. Really, truly dead. The threat she'd lived with for so long, the shadow that had hung over her family, was finally gone. "Mrs. Blackwood? Are you still there?" "Yes," Rebecca managed. "I'm here, thank you for telling me. There will be paperwork, formal notifications. But I wanted you to know immediately. I thought it might bring you some peace." "Peace?" Was that what she was feeling? The emotion swirling within her was complex. Relief certainly, but also a strange unexpected grief, not for Marcus himself, but for all that had been lost because of him. For the young woman she'd been before the abuse, for the years spent looking over her shoulder, for the innocence that could never be reclaimed. After ending the call, Rebecca sat in the storage unit for a long time, surrounded by the physical remnants of her past, trying to make sense of her feelings. Finally she gathered the spilled contents of the box, returned them carefully, and carried the box to her car. It was time to bring the last pieces of herself home. When she arrived, David's car was already in the driveway. She found him in the kitchen, preparing lunch, Oliver setting the table beside him. "You're back early," she observed, setting the box on the counter. David looked up, his expression curious. Jason's mom had a change of plans. "What's that?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "The last of Emma Lawson's possessions, and I just got a call from Detective Morales. Marcus is dead. They found his body in Mexico." David froze, a knife holding suspended over the sandwich he was preparing. "Are they sure?" "Dental records confirmed it. He's been dead for months." "Mom?" Oliver looked between them, sensing the significance of the moment even if he didn't fully understand it. "Is everything okay?" Rebecca knelt down to her son's level, looking into his eyes that sometimes in certain lights reminded her fleetingly of Marcus. But the soul behind those eyes was entirely Oliver's own kind, curious, untainted by the darkness that had consumed his biological father. "Everything is more than okay," she assured him. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Later that evening, after Oliver had gone to bed, Rebecca and David sat on their back porch again, a bottle of wine open between them, stars emerging overhead, just as they had on that autumn night 6 months earlier. "How do you feel?" David asked, refilling her glass. "About Marcus." Rebecca considered the question, relieved mostly, and sad in a way I didn't expect. Not for him, exactly, but for what might have been in some alternate universe where he wasn't the person he turned out to be. David nodded, understanding as always. "You know, in all the chaos, all the fear, I never thanked you." "Thanked me, for what?" "For Oliver," he said simply. "If you hadn't gone through everything you did with Marcus, if you hadn't escaped when you did, we wouldn't have our son. I can't imagine a life without him in it." Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder, oddly moved by this perspective. From the ashes of her traumatic relationship with Marcus had emerged the greatest gift of her life. Oliver, and through Oliver, she had found David the Blackwoods, a genuine family, built on love rather than control or fear. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Without the threat of Marcus hanging over us?" David smiled, pulling her closer. Now we live, Beck. We just live." Chapter 7. The Echo. 1 year later, Rebecca stood in the warm June sunshine, watching Oliver pitch in the championship game of his Little League division. At 9 years old, he'd discovered a natural talent for baseball, his lean frame already showing hints of the athlete he might become.